On a cold morning in January 1877, the richest man in America lay dying in his Manhattan mansion. Cornelius Vanderbilt was 82 years old. He had built a fortune so vast that it exceeded the entire United States Treasury. He had crushed rivals, destroyed competitors, and bent an entire nation to his will. Now, as his family gathered around his bed, the old man who had started with nothing was about to leave behind more money than any American had ever possessed. This is the story of how a poor farm boy from Staten Island became the most powerful businessman in American history, and what happened to the empire he built. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born on May 27, 1794, on Staten Island, New York. His family was poor. His father was a farmer who also operated a small boat ferrying cargo around New York Harbor. Young Cornelius had little formal education. He left school at 11 to work with his father on the water. He was tough, ambitious, and utterly ruthless from an early age. His mother recognized something unusual in him. When Cornelius was 16, he asked her for a loan of $100 to buy his own boat. She agreed, on the condition that he clear and plant an 8-acre field on the family farm before his birthday. He recruited friends to help and finished the job with time to spare. That $100 loan would be the foundation of one of the greatest fortunes in history. With his small boat, young Cornelius began ferrying passengers and cargo around New York Harbor. He worked 7 days a week, often 18 hours a day. He undercut his competitors on price while providing faster and more reliable service. He learned every current, every sandbar, every trick of navigating the busy harbor. When the War of 1812 broke out, he won government contracts to supply military posts around New York. By the time the war ended, Cornelius Vanderbilt was still in his early 20s, but had already saved nearly $10,000, an enormous sum for that time. He had earned his first nickname, the Commodore, a title he would carry for the rest of his life. But Vanderbilt saw that the future lay not in sailing ships, but in steam power. In 1818, he made a surprising decision. He sold his fleet of sailing vessels and went to work for someone else. Thomas Gibbons owned a steamboat company, and Vanderbilt became his captain and business manager. For more than a decade, Vanderbilt learned the steamboat business from the inside. He studied every aspect of the operation, from engineering to management to finance. He learned how to cut costs ruthlessly while improving service. Most importantly, he fought a legal battle against a state-granted monopoly that tried to control steam travel in New York waters. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Vanderbilt's side won. The ruling opened up American waterways to free competition, and no one was better prepared to compete than Cornelius Vanderbilt. In 1829, Vanderbilt launched his own steamboat company. He was 35 years old and had spent half his life preparing for this moment. He attacked established competitors with a strategy that would become his signature. He lowered prices so dramatically that rivals could not match him without losing money. When they tried to buy him out, he took their money and then started a new competing line. When they tried to undercut him, he had the resources to sustain losses longer than they could. One by one, his competitors either sold out to him or went bankrupt. Within a few years, Vanderbilt dominated steamboat travel along the Hudson River and Long Island Sound. The California Gold Rush of 1849 created a new opportunity. Thousands of people wanted to get from the East Coast to California as quickly as possible. The fastest route was across Central America. Vanderbilt created the Accessory Transit Company, which carried passengers by steamship to Nicaragua, then across the country by boat and stagecoach, then by steamship again to San Francisco. The route was shorter and cheaper than competing routes across Panama. Vanderbilt was soon making more than $1 million per year from this single operation. In today's money, that would be roughly $30 million annually. But even as he grew wealthy from shipping, Vanderbilt saw that the real future lay in railroads. Steam power on water had transformed transportation. Steam power on rails would transform it even more dramatically. Railroads could go anywhere, not just along rivers and coasts. They could operate year-round, regardless of weather. They could move goods and people faster than any ship. In the 1850s and 60s, Vanderbilt began quietly buying stock in railroad companies. He started with the New York and Harlem Railroad, a small line that ran through Manhattan. Other investors thought he was foolish. The railroad was poorly managed and unprofitable, but Vanderbilt saw potential that others missed. He took control of the railroad and immediately began improving it. He upgraded the tracks, bought new locomotives, and imposed strict discipline on the workforce. He cut costs wherever possible while investing in infrastructure that would pay off over time. Within a few years, the New York and Harlem was profitable. Vanderbilt then acquired the Hudson River Railroad and merged it with his first acquisition. He now controlled rail travel from Manhattan up the Hudson Valley. But this was just the beginning. Vanderbilt's greatest target was the New York Central Railroad, which ran from Albany to Buffalo. Combined with his existing lines, it would give him control of rail travel from New York City to the Great Lakes. The directors of the New York Central resisted his attempts to buy them out. Vanderbilt responded with characteristic ruthlessness. In the winter of 1867, he simply refused to accept New York Central passengers or freight at his Hudson River station in Albany. Travelers and goods had to cross the frozen Hudson River on foot or by sleigh to reach the Central's trains. The disruption was catastrophic. Stock prices collapsed. Within 2 months, the directors surrendered. Vanderbilt merged the New York Central into his growing empire. By 1870, Cornelius Vanderbilt controlled the most important railroad network in the United States. His trains carried passengers and freight from New York City to Chicago, the heart of the American economy. He was 66 years old and worth more than $100 million. In an era when a skilled worker might earn $500 per year, Vanderbilt's wealth was almost incomprehensible. He built a massive new terminal in Manhattan, Grand Central Depot, as a monument to his power. He constructed a mansion on Fifth Avenue that was the largest and most expensive home in New York City. He had risen from poverty to become the richest person in the world. But Vanderbilt's methods created many enemies. He was famous for his contempt for the public and for any laws that stood in his way. When accused of illegal stock manipulation, he reportedly said, "Law? What do I care about law? I got the power, ain't I?" He bribed legislators, manipulated markets, and destroyed competitors without mercy. In the infamous Erie Railroad War, he battled Jay Gould and Jim Fisk for control of the Erie Railroad. His opponents responded by printing millions of dollars in fraudulent stock, diluting Vanderbilt's ownership. When he obtained arrest warrants, Gould and Fisk simply fled to New Jersey with $6 million in cash, beyond the reach of New York authorities. It was one of the few battles Vanderbilt ever lost. As Vanderbilt aged, questions arose about what would happen to his vast fortune. He had 13 children from his first marriage, though several had died young. His relations with most of them were cold and distant. His eldest son, William Henry Vanderbilt, had been dismissed by his father as a fool for most of his life. Cornelius had sent William to run a small failing railroad on Staten Island, apparently expecting him to fail. Instead, William had turned the railroad around and made it profitable. Gradually, the old Commodore came to respect his son's business abilities. William would eventually inherit the bulk of the fortune. In 1869, Vanderbilt's first wife died after 50 years of marriage. Within a year, the 76-year-old tycoon married again to a woman named Frank Armstrong Crawford. She was 33 years younger than him. The marriage scandalized society, but Vanderbilt had never cared what society thought. His new wife introduced him to spiritualism, the belief that the living could communicate with the dead. In his final years, Vanderbilt attended seances and claimed to receive messages from beyond the grave. It was a strange end for a man who had always been so ruthlessly practical. Cornelius Vanderbilt died on January 4, 1877. His estate was valued at approximately $100 million, equivalent to over $2 billion today. It was the largest fortune ever accumulated by an American up to that time. In his will, he left the vast majority of his wealth to his son William. His other children and grandchildren received relatively small amounts. Several of them challenged the will in court, leading to a sensational trial that exposed the family's bitter divisions. William eventually settled with his siblings to end the embarrassing spectacle. William Henry Vanderbilt proved to be a capable steward of his father's empire. He expanded the railroad network and nearly doubled the family fortune within 8 years. But he also became the target of public anger against monopolies and concentrated wealth. When a reporter asked about his responsibility to the public, William replied, "The public be damned." The quote, possibly taken out of context, became a symbol of Gilded Age arrogance. William died in 1885, just 8 years after his father, leaving $200 million to be divided among his children. The third generation of Vanderbilts lived very differently from the Commodore. They built spectacular mansions in New York and Newport, Rhode Island. The Breakers, Marble House, and Biltmore remain monuments to their extravagance. They married European aristocrats and competed to outspend each other on parties, yachts, and art collections. They also spent faster than even their vast inheritance could sustain. By the early 20th century, the Vanderbilt fortune was being rapidly depleted. The family that had once been the richest in America produced no new great business leaders. The Commodore's descendants became famous for their spending, not their earning. By 1973, less than a century after Cornelius Vanderbilt's death, 120 of his descendants gathered at Vanderbilt University for a family reunion. Not one of them was a millionaire. The fortune that had been the largest in American history had been completely dissipated. The mansions had been sold, demolished, or turned into museums. Grand Central Depot had been torn down and replaced twice. The New York Central Railroad, the heart of Vanderbilt's empire, would go bankrupt in 1970 and eventually merge with its old rival, the Pennsylvania Railroad. The story of Cornelius Vanderbilt contains a lesson that echoes through American history. He was a man of extraordinary ability and equally extraordinary ruthlessness. He built an empire through brilliance, hard work, and a complete disregard for anyone who stood in his way. He believed that wealth meant power, and power meant the freedom to do whatever he wished. In many ways, he defined the possibilities and the problems of American capitalism. The fortune he built was staggering, but it could not survive the generations that followed him. The Commodore rose from nothing to become the richest man in America. His great-great-grandchildren were no wealthier than the farm boy who borrowed $100 from his mother to buy his first boat.